Life science venture capital. How much is there? Where is it? Where is it invested in? Let's talk about it now. Hi, I'm Oliver and welcome back to the channel Ask Me Startup, where we talk about startups, small businesses, and the world that surrounds them. If you're new here, please consider subscribing and pushing the notification bell so YouTube lets you know whenever we're uploading new content. If you're planning to start a business, if you're running a small business or a small startup, please feel free to download our free startup checklist, link in the description below. So today's topic, life science venture capital. How much is there? Where is it located? Where is it invested in? As a disclaimer, the data I present throughout this video have been taken from a publicly available database, the Sapphire Bioinvestment Database. I have no affiliation with them whatsoever. This is more for educational purpose and to understand why it is important that you, as a member of a startup, as a CEO or as a founder, understand the investor landscape. You have to understand what are investors looking at to invest in, what are investors invested in, and what are their preferred sectors. As many of you might know, I do personally work in the life science sector, and hence I was very much interested to understand why it is so challenging to get the funding. And I'm not complaining about, I get a 99% dismissal rate because there are thousands of investors. No, it's more to understand why companies that are similar, but let's say in a neighboring sector, have it easier or get more easier access to funding. If we look at the life science sector and the investments done, we can say good news, investments has been rising. There have been roughly approximately $8 billion US invested in startups over the last year. And as you can see on that graph here, we can see that there has been an increase, except for Q4 last year, of investments in startups. So these are good news because it means that the life science sector is getting more attention now. And as everybody knows that works in the life science sector, it usually takes some time before products and ideas are ready to go on the market. And it can sometimes be 10 years plus. So you have to understand that those investors are really, really committed if they're investing in a life science startup. But it seems that they have understood that it's important to invest in new technologies and new products that we're able to deal with situations like the current one better in the future. Then we need to look at the investor side. Fortunately for us, if we look at the graph, we can see that there's a substantial amount of seed funding investors for life science. And those are people that love or have been maybe in that field prior, and they do understand it much better than the others. And they are having the largest risk. Of course, because not every company makes it even to a Series A. Then we can see that Series A, it's the biggest rounds, is where the most investors are invested in. Why? Well, if companies make it to a Series A, they have a decent proposal and there are more companies around and the investors get a bigger share. That, of course, decreases for the same reasons because fewer and fewer companies will make it to the following rounds. Nonetheless, we still can see that there are more than 300 investors in for round E as well. So we understand what type of investors are out there, but we have to understand what type of sectors they prefer to invest in. And if you look at the graph here, we can see that by far the biggest share goes to biotech. Well, biotech can be anything from a drug to a biomolecule to a vaccine. As an example, we would have BioNTech, which has come up with one of the first vaccines out there for the current pandemic. The second largest part would be digital AI-based health. Why? Because we need faster and better data, and we need a better understanding how everything works together to prevent situations like we have today or to deal with them in a better and smarter and specifically cheaper way. The third largest sector would be medical devices. Medical devices can be anything from a machine to a hip replacement to a bone or exoskeleton. Anything like that could be a medical device. The smallest part of the pie of investments done is in the diagnostic sector. Now, diagnostics, you would go like, why is that so small? Because currently everybody's diagnosed yes or no on COVID, right? Yes, you're right. But diagnostic, that's where we actually work in. We're working in cancer diagnostics. Tends to be very, very equity intense. Meaning you will have to establish large amounts of infrastructure throughout the place where you plan to run your business. And that, of course, is capital intensive, which reduces the factor or the multiple that companies could get. Whereas if you would come up with in the biotech field with a drug, you have the recipe. You don't need to buy the equipment to manufacture the drug. You just go to a supplier, to a third party that has everything set up. Hence, the multiples are by factors of 5 to 10 higher in the biotech field. That's again the reason why the more investments are going to the biotech fields, because even if they have a higher rate of failure, it's easier because one of those companies will win and they will get a 20x, 30x, whatever x on their current or initial investment. But then you want to take a deeper look into the numbers, because if you look at the graph right now, you can see that almost all of those sectors have a division of 2 by pure venture capital or corporate venture capital investments. Why is that important? As I mentioned in the previous video, which I'm going to link up here, there are companies that have strategic gaps in their portfolios. These are big companies, but they cannot solve the problem of the gap that they're currently facing, and this might drive them out of the market. Hence, they have a very, very deep interest to add on new technologies that will help them to close the gaps they have towards their competitors in order to survive on the long run. What you can also see is that the accelerators almost play no role at all. I'm not saying you should neglect them completely, but from my point of view, it shouldn't be your highest priority at all. So now you have all the data. You think, oh, that's great. I want to start a company. And then you might wonder, where is the best place to do so? The 2 biggest markets currently on life science are United States and Europe. But only one of those areas has the largest tickets and the biggest number of investments, and that is the United States. Interestingly, even European-based investment funds tend to invest 50% roughly in companies based in the US. Whereas the opposite actually is not true. So there's only a tiny fraction of investment capital that goes from the United States to Europe. Why is that the case? That's a good question. Most likely it is that in the United States, things are looked at in a larger scale and more on a global scale, whereas in Europe, things are more locally organized and it's hard for some investors to look at the international big picture. Also, we have to be clear that reimbursement, specifically in the life science field, for medical devices, for diagnostic tests, anything like drugs, are by a factor X higher in the United States, which makes it more lucrative to sell in the United States. And this will mean you get higher margins and higher returns in the United States. Hence, you can afford higher investments. So have you started your company in the life science field? Or have you started a company at all, a startup in a different sector? Have you been looking in such a detail into the investors landscape that you can plan what type of business you would like to start and where? If so, or if not, doesn't matter. Just drop a comment down below. Tell us your pros and cons. Tell us what you've been struggling with or what you've been successful with and what were your biggest challenges. Looking forward to discuss this with you. Thank you very much for making it that far into the video. Please remember to subscribe and I see you next time.